Have you ever had to pick teams? And there you are, you're one team captain, another team captain, and you're looking around trying to decide who I'm going to pick? That's hard. Have you ever had to determine the callings in a ward or in your relief society or in your elders quorum? And who do I choose? Imagine being the three witnesses at the beginning of it all and tasked with the assignment, choose the 12. Now, they're not going to form a quorum for another 5 years or so, okay? It's not until 1835 that an actual quorum of the 12 will be established. But be on the lookout for those who might be called to this. And they did talk about how hard that was and how hard they looked over the next few years. Now, to put it in perspective, look at verse 26 and 27 of section 18. The Lord tells them, "Now behold, there are others who are called to declare my gospel, both unto Gentile and unto Jew." So this is a worldwide audience. Apostles are going to be called to teach everyone, just like was done in the early church. But with this thought of these 12 that will go forth, notice their qualifications. They shall take upon them my name. Again, it won't be forced upon them. They will be looking to embrace it, to take it. And the 12 are they who shall desire to take upon them my name with full purpose of heart. Now that is a scriptural definition of how to spot an apostle. They desire to take my name upon them. And that desire trumps every other. It is full purpose of heart. Now, what's interesting to me is that so many of today's apostles had other names that were pretty impressive. Worldly titles that bore some world renown. And yet, if I have a desire to take upon myself the name of Christ with full purpose of heart, then whatever part of my heart was wrapped around that earlier name or earlier title, it's got to go. I need to be willing to sacrifice it, give it up, because there's only space for one title when all is said and done. And if it's going to be President Russell M. Nelson, then you'll no longer be Dr. Russell M. Nelson. It's amazing that a world-renowned heart surgeon, part of these initial teams that figured out how to perform heart transplants, he traveled the world and trained other doctors to be able to do it. The same could be said of Justice Dallin H. Oaks, a member of the Utah State Supreme Court, and whose name it kept getting brought up as a potential candidate for the U.S. Supreme Court. Can you imagine? If Elder Oaks were Justice Oaks of the U.S. Supreme Court, he'd still be on the bench. And yet in 1984, the Lord said, "Would you take upon yourself my name instead? At the sacrifice of your name, would you do that with full purpose of heart?" It was the same conference in the same year that Dr. Nelson became Elder Nelson and Justice Oaks became Elder Oaks. And they've been serving ever since. President Hinckley addressed the unspoken question. I bet you're all wondering, with these two men doing such incredible things in their fields of endeavor, why on earth would we take them out of those positions and put them in these ones? Couldn't they do more good in the world? And President Hinckley answered, why did we pull them out of those positions? Well, we didn't. The Lord did. Now, there was a Professor Eyring with an incredible resume, Harvard, MIT, and then teaching at Stanford. And yet when Professor Eyring was asked, would you consider leading the churches, would you consider presiding over Rick's College? And this Ivy Leaguer, gone to Stanford, said, what's Rick's College? He'd never heard of it. And the prophet at the time speaking to him was like, oh, no, actually, the Church Commissioner of Education was kind of, that's the church's junior college in Rexburg. And Elder Eyring, or Professor Eyring was like, where the heck is Rexburg? He didn't even know where that was. And once it dawned on him, oh, this is what you're asking? You're asking me to leave my position as a tenured professor at the business school at Stanford in Palo Alto, California, to go preside over a tiny junior college I'd never heard of in rural Idaho? Are you serious? Yeah. And Professor Eyring became President Eyring of Ricks College and never looked back, as he then became Bishop Eyring of the presiding bishopric and Elder Eyring of the Quorum of the 12, and now President Eyring of the First Presidency. The common denominator in all of those titles is having taken upon himself the name of Jesus with full purpose of heart. I'm amazed by their self-sacrifice of worldly names to embrace the only name that matters. One last example of this. Richard G. Scott was an apostle when we were all a little younger. And when he was a little younger, he worked for the U.S. Navy. He was a nuclear engineer. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to become an apostle, but in his case, he had been, okay? So incredibly smart, and was tasked with creating a nuclear navy in the middle of the Cold War. The Americans had to beat the Russians to the nuclear secrets of powering a navy. And Richard G. Scott was on the task until he was tasked by a prophet to go preside over a mission in South America. He accepted that mission call and then went to the admiral of the U.S. Navy to tender his temporary resignation. Now, the admiral at the time, Hyman Rickover, was known for being tough as nails. And he did not take Richard G. Scott's offer lightly. In fact, he wouldn't take it at all. No, I refuse to let you retire temporarily. You cannot leave your post. In fact, he got so up in arms over it, he accused him of treason, basically, and said, if you leave this, we're not going to get the nuclear navy we need. You'll be a traitor to your country. You've got to stay here. I won't let it happen. Who's this prophet guy you were talking about? Who told you to do this? Give me his number. Get me on the line with David O. McKay. Whoa. At one point, he even said, if this is how you Latter-day Saints, you Mormons do, then I'll kick every Mormon out of the Navy. And now Richard G. Scott is worried, am I putting other people's livelihoods in danger? Should I just step away from my church, this church calling, and stay in the position that I'm supposed to be fulfilling? And right then, a hymn popped into his head. Do what is right, let the consequence follow. So he accepted the mission call, followed through on his plan to depart from the Navy, trained a successor as quickly as he could, and then brought a copy of the Book of Mormon to Admiral Rickover. Rickover wouldn't even talk to him. He'd always work through a middleman because I will never talk to you again. In fact, you'll never work in this field again, Scott. And when Richard Scott called the secretary of the admiral, said, I want to come see him. And they're like, no, he's not going to see you. And says, well, I'm coming anyway. With a Book of Mormon under his arm, humming to himself, do what is right, let the consequence follow, he marched into the admiral's office, slapped down the copy of the Book of Mormon and said, I'm sorry I have to leave, but at least I could do is give you the reason why I'm leaving. It's all in this book. And as they discussed things, Admiral Rickover's heart softened and said, Scott, if that's the courage of your conviction, maybe I need more people like you, not less. When you're done with this mission of yours, whatever it is, come see me. There'll be a job waiting. And sure enough, there was. Now, what amazes me about this is it's one thing to have that kind of courage when you're a 70-year-old apostle. Young Rick Scott was a 36-year-old stake clerk. And yet, with the courage of his convictions, with a desire above all other desires to take upon himself the name of Christ with full purpose of heart, he was willing to leave behind all lesser names and titles. I hope we can do the same. What's our name? Is there a better one? What's our heart's desire? Is there a more noble one? And with full purpose of heart, as we're looking for apostles, in that case, capital A, how about ours with a lowercase? Someone who is sent with a message from the Lord. In any of our lowercase a apostolic assignments, may our heart be fully in it. That's how the Lord will know who we are, by knowing whose we are.